Yeah, so today we have a problem in the sense that some of the traditional countervailing powers, like trade unions, which were strong in the post-war period, have receded greatly. And other powers or forces that played a role to some extent, like the media, are in substantial disarray. So who is going to stand up to the technology visionaries when they say, oh, we've got to do it this way? It has to be the particular vision of self-driving cars or the use of robots or something about AI in the workplace. And they insist that's the only way to do it, and they insist that's the only essential key to national prosperity and national security. So I think the main thing to do is to engage with them at the technical level and to show there are alternative paths and to argue that what they want is not a good outcome for most people, and then to trace that through the data and to show that's the case. Again, I don't think academic papers change the world. I think the events change the world, but you need to prepare people and you need to be arguing, you need to be making the case for alternatives when the opportunity provided by events presents itself. My name is Simon Johnson. I'm a professor at MIT's Sloan School of Management. While technology has developed a great deal over the past 1,000 years, and it continues to develop, it's a mistake to think of it as following one predetermined path. There are many paths that technology can take, and there are many choices that are being made by inventors, by management, and by tech visionaries, and by society that determine which way technology goes and who wins and who loses. Technology can be pretty disruptive to societies, as well as raising productivity and hopefully creating higher income levels. The question, though, is who gains when you have a big wave of innovations like artificial intelligence or like the weaving machines in the early late 18th century, early 19th century, for example. Do most of the gains go to a few people who own the capital? Do they go to a broader set of educated people? Do they go to people who are workers and who are actually working in the factories? We've seen many different choices, many different twists and turns in the history of technology, and our book attempts to explain those and put those all into one integrated picture to ask the question, what comes next with artificial intelligence, and particularly what are the choices that need to be made and who's going to make them? So the path of technology that was followed after World War II in the United States and other countries was broadly inclusive. There was a lot of shared prosperity. The expression, the rising tide lifts all boats, fits that period quite well. But once the digital transformation really took hold in the 1980s and, of course, even more in the 1990s, we see a widening of income gaps. If you look at the earnings of highly educated people versus people with less education, that gap increases steadily from the 1980s, and it has continued to widen through to today. So the digital technologies are a big part of that job market polarization, as it's called, and a big part of that dimension of widening income inequality. I don't like the term good and bad technology. I think it's a question of who wins and who loses. So if technology has some purpose and some value, it's likely to be adopted by someone, but who is going to get most of the gains? Are those gains going to a relatively small elite, let's call them, or are they going to a broader cross-section of society? That's the big decision, that's the big choice point that you have in any technological transformation, certainly the big waves that we've seen in history and today. Digital transformation has led to job market polarization, so people with more education doing really quite well, but people without much education not doing well. The other confounding factors have played a role, like globalization and the decline of trade unions, but the digital transformation has really undermined the notion of shared prosperity in countries like the United States. AI, in our view, presents us with a choice, again, a big choice. We could either get a version of the technology in the hands of a few people that automates a lot of jobs and increases surveillance, invades privacy, and results in big profits for a few companies and even a few individuals. Or we could get something quite different, which much more what we call pro-worker AI, where you're boosting the productivity and hopefully also the wages of people who don't have a lot of education. So that choice, I think, still remains to be made, although there are plenty of pressures right now pushing us towards the rather more elitist version of AI, in which a few people make huge fortunes and everyone else doesn't do well. If you look historically, you can see, for example, the rise of trade unions as an important force in Europe in the 19th century and in the United States, perhaps a little bit more in the 20th century, where the unions were asking to participate in the benefits from increased productivity, improved technology. So they were a very powerful social force for at least 100 years that worked hard towards the sharing of the gains from technological progress or technological improvements. Today, of course, trade unions are much weaker, and it's harder for them to play a major role in what we're experiencing now and what lies ahead. Well, I don't think I'm pessimistic. I think I'm concerned, is what I would say, because there's a lot of power right now in the tech sector, particularly in big technology companies, in people who are present themselves as tech visionaries, and those visions are seen by many people as rather attractive. And people are pulled in towards those visions, say, oh yes, let's have self-driving cars, let's have robots that can do the following tasks, let's allow AI to take over certain kind of creative roles, without realizing the way in which that adds up is going to strip a lot of good jobs out of the hands of people, out of the hands of humans who will have to go off and make a living doing something else, that won't be well compensated, and a lot of power and control over other people's lives will pass in the hands of a few people. And honestly, at the moment, it looks like we might be looking at 10 people or even fewer who will really emerge from this entire broad technological transformation with probably previously unparalleled and unprecedented power over other humans throughout the planet. It's all contestable terrain, and I do think there will be scandals, there will be horrors that you'll see, there will be opportunities to recoil from the path that we may now find ourselves on. But it is dangerous, without question. If we allow the tech visionaries to own the debate and to own all the terminology and to own all of the ideas that are considered to be good ideas, then we are in for a lot of trouble. So we prefer and recommend the path that we call pro-worker AI, in which we will develop versions of AI and uses of AI that boost the productivity of less educated workers. So, for example, for electricians or for plumbers or for nurses, this will be a tool that will enable them to be better at their jobs, to be safer in their jobs, to be able to contribute more and to be more fulfilled. And this will enable them to earn more money. So instead of the job market polarization, where incomes at the top have risen and incomes at the bottom have struggled, we'd see incomes for people with less education pulling up towards the incomes of the people at the top. Doesn't mean people at the top lose, by the way, not at all, but it does mean that people at the bottom will less feel like they've been left behind. Our book came out in 2023, so at that time it was quite sensible to propose that the federal government, for example, change tax policy or put in place incentives to move technology in a pro-AI direction. Honestly, I think today action by the federal government is less likely, so we're talking more with the private sector. It's more about companies and executives and the stock market believing that there's value to be had for shareholders and for everybody who works in the company by encouraging this pro-worker AI approach. We're suggesting that you raise productivity of people. We're suggesting to create new tasks. We're suggesting to move the frontier of human possibilities using technology. So essentially, we're trying to create an alternative vision, I would say. And we're also emphasizing that while this initial phase of AI is tightly held by a few companies, as the tools become available and as they become applied in different industries, there are many more choices to be made about who is helped and who is hindered by the adoption of different versions of AI. The private sector has a tendency to move in the direction of automation. It's a simple story. It's a story that people understand. If you adopt this software, you don't need 27 people. You need 22 people in your shop or in this part of your factory and so on. So the creation of new tasks is something that is a bit less well defined and a bit more vague in the eyes of some managers. And so that's something that we work on also to try and highlight cases where people with disabilities, for example, have become much more productive because they're able to use AI. People have become much safer because AI surveillance is actually preventing workplace accidents. And people's schedules have become more manageable and more humane because now there is a technical ability to understand childcare concerns and adult care concerns and so on, and to produce an overall schedule solution for a hospital system, for example, that is better for the people who work there. Within the government realm, of course, it's always possible to have legislation. You have legislation about surveillance and privacy, and I do think we will get some of that because we're already seeing privacy being invaded, and we're seeing a lot of cyber crime and a lot of inappropriate surveillance, and this will become more exaggerated. So legislation is one piece. There's also potential regulation of workplaces, for example, occupational safety regulations. Again, to the extent we see bad things happening when AI is deployed in irresponsible ways, I think you could still see some backlash there. And then there's the proactive investments, sort of a DARPA approach, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Administration agency, which encourages technology to move in a certain direction by making investments, by creating prizes, by signaling that if you build certain kinds of technology, the government's willing to buy it. All of these things are still possible, and they're all things that we recommend. Whether the current administration will pursue them or not, I think, is less clear. when you talk with people about the technology and you show them the history and you walk them through case studies and individual impact and so on, they're very interested in this. And I find people are extremely curious. They ask really good questions. This is true all around the country and actually around the world, to be quite honest. So I think that papers and academic books don't change the world. I think events change the world, things that you see, things that you encounter, your lived experience. But if the idea is already around you that we can take a different path, that there are choices for technology, and that the direction of technology can be altered deliberately and in a sensible way by society, I think that's an idea that can gain traction, and then we'll see what the events are, and we'll see what opportunities present themselves. So I think that the history of technology is very interesting. When you look at it carefully, we're always very taken by the idea that machines have arrived, and machines have taken over these tasks that the workers and humans were previously doing. But actually, if you consider, for example, what Henry Ford did when he brought a lot more machines to car production, he not only automated production, he brought electricity to the production line, so now we had machines running on electricity. It was a lot more efficient, and he could design a flow of work that really was remarkable, nothing like it ever seen in the world before. But the other thing that Ford and his contemporaries and his engineers did was create a lot of new tasks for people. So the US auto industry employed about 20,000 people in 1900, and it made perhaps 30,000 cars, very artisanal production. In 1929, Ford and GM alone made 3 million cars, and the US auto industry employed 400,000 people. So most of those people in 1929 were doing things that humans had never done before 1900. And I think that's what we should remember in terms of successful industrial transformations. It's not just the machines show up and I give them the jobs that I don't want the humans to do, or the humans find it very hard to do. It's that you also create, from the very beginnings of the process, from the raw materials to the way in which they're brought together, the way in which the factory operates, the way in which you distribute the product, and the way in which the product is used, you create new tasks. And it's creating new tasks that require expertise. That's why people get paid more than a subsistence wage. And that's what you need to focus on, and that should be the drive that inventors have and that technologists have and that managers have if they want to have big, lasting, positive social impact. Yeah, so today we have a problem in the sense that some of the traditional countervailing powers, like trade unions, which were strong in the post-war period, have receded greatly. And other powers or forces that played a role to some extent, like the media, are in substantial disarray. So who is going to stand up to the technology visionaries when they say, oh, we've got to do it this way? It has to be the particular vision of self-driving cars or the use of robots or something about AI in the workplace. And they insist that's the only way to do it, and they insist that's the only essential key to national prosperity and national security. So I think the main thing to do is to engage with them at the technical level and to show there are alternative paths and to argue that what they want is not a good outcome for most people, and then to trace that through the data and to show that's the case. Again, I don't think academic papers change the world. I think the events change the world, but you need to prepare people, and you need to be arguing, you need to be making the case for alternatives when the opportunity provided by events presents itself.